more Brazil.
Hi again, everyone, and thanks so much for joining. Welcome to part 3 of our Ask the Experts webinar series, Unpacking Agile Research. I just want to go through a few housekeeping items before our panelists get started. There's 2 different ways that you can communicate with us throughout the webinar. We have the chat and the Q&A box. If you could put all technical issues related to the platform in the chat box, that would be great. And the Q&A box for any questions related to the webinar. So our panelists can see and answer, that would be great too. With that, I would like to introduce our speakers for today. We have Zoe Dowling, who is our SVP of Research here at Focus Vision. She is an eclectic blend of researcher, technologist, sociologist, and marketer, and she uses her extensive research expertise to help clients best apply Focus Vision's technological solutions. Joining Zoe is Carisha Larios, Quantitative Insight Specialist. Carisha is a senior insights leader with 14 years of research experience and a reputation for stripping down data into meaningful and compelling stories suitable for any audience. At this time, our panelists are going to dive right into the discussion. Zoe, would you like to get started?
I will. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So glad you're going to spend this next little while with us. Good morning, Carisha. Carisha's in Los Angeles with.
Good morning.
So we're just starting our day. So let me give a little bit of a preamble. I'm sure you read the synopsis of what we're going to cover. Agile research is something that we've been talking about as an industry for a number of years now. And as I've been thinking about it in recent months, I mean, with COVID-19 really giving us pause on so many different levels and bringing in new economic conditions that might, does have impact of research that we've seen. And I've started to hear more about Agile being talked about even more. So it's made me think about what do we mean about all of this? And then Carisha and I were talking, and we've had some great discussions about it. And that's why we're here today to talk about this. We've got things that we're going to discuss back and forth. I'm really curious. We're both really curious and would like to encourage you to chat amongst yourselves using the chat box, to put questions in for us, but also to share your experiences. If you hear something, you say, I don't agree with that, let us know. And I'll definitely be reading that out, because what I certainly would like to get out of today is for us as an industry to take a pause and think about, what do we mean by Agile research? Are we doing this and we've evolved into it and we just haven't kind of put clearly defined it? Or would a pause be helpful and thinking about, well, if we put this process in play, or what does this look like? So I feel as if collectively this is a really good time for us to talk about it and to try and push things forward and think how we can help. COVID is changing things, shaking things up. So this is a great time to think about, what do we mean about Agile? What does this mean going forward? And hence that's the genesis of this discussion. So definitely encourage everybody to participate in the chat, in the question and answer. But let us kick off. And I think I always love asking this, and I think this might be my new thing of I know we're all curious, I'm certainly curious of how we got started in market research, because there's very few of us that said at the age of 10, I want to be a market researcher. And Carisha, I know that was not you. So how did you end up in this world?
Like many others, I sort of fell into it. When I went to college, I went for public relations and political science, and the goal was to be a campaign manager. And thank goodness I did not do that, because I just don't think that life was for me. But in the process of getting that degree, I had to take a research class, a research methods class, and I loved it. And I realized that that is something that I would like to do. So then it was just, what do you do if you want to do research? And then I learned that there was something called market research. And I do think today, because consumers are just much more savvy, people know that this is an industry and you can actually get a degree in it. But I think, way back when we were getting into it, it was, oh, hey, look at that. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that they did that. I think I could like doing that.
Yeah.
And so, I just kind of decided to apply to only jobs that were market research.
Ah, And that's great. And one of the things that I think is kind of encouraging about that is I think you're right that there is an elevated awareness of there is a field of market research, consumer insights. Again, we could talk about the different names on our industry, but I think that is a nice indication of how the importance of what we do is recognized and is becoming more part of the public psyche.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the biggest change from when you started to now?
So I think it actually has to do with exactly that thing. But taking it away from people understand that there's an industry, people understand that there's a process of insights that go into the products and services that they buy. I kind of remember way back when I first started working with, quote, content providers, in our questionnaire language, we would have to think about how we were not going to say content because that didn't mean anything to people. Like, what were you actually saying? But today that means everyone knows what that means, at least in younger generations. They know what we're talking about. There's, some lingo that you can use now that you couldn't then, and they're just so much more privy to the process. And I think that is both scary and a great opportunity because it means that we have that much more opportunity to incorporate consumer feedback as we go along. But then again, everybody's an expert, so that's a problem too.
So is that really that getting into sort of there's been a democratization of research where a lot of different groups. So I think let's put that on because I think that's a whole different topic that we could delve into, and I think that's a really interesting one. But let's go into where we are with Agile. Maybe even that does feed into it. So let's kick off. Let's just try and set the bar. What do we really mean when we're talking about Agile research?
Yeah. So you and I, as you mentioned, have talked about this at length, and I think a lot of people have. I think let's start with what Agile really meant before we kind of commandeered that term, just like everybody else commandeered that term. And so to do that, I'm just going to go to a very short definition of that, which is relating to or denoting a method of project management used especially for software development that is characterized by the division of tasks into short phases of work, frequent reassessment, and adaptation of plans that usually gets people to some kind of delivery cycle earlier that is then iterated upon. So that's kind of what we're working with when we're thinking of Agile. But I think
So, Krishak, if I could jump in there, because I think that definition is really helpful, because I was just hearing some of this. I know that relates to the technological generally. So it's a project management. So it's actually like that was the first thing, like a process that's followed. And then it's short phase.
Yes.
That might be the next thing. There was one that I missed.
Frequent reassessment.
So reassessment. So reassessing the work.
Yeah.
And then I got the iterative, was the one before. I can't read my writing.
Phases of work, frequent reassessment, and adaptation of plans.
So adaptation.
Yeah.
So it's really, I guess, a process that has a limited period of time that has then deliverables, and then it's iterative upon.
Until you're done. Yeah.
Okay. So sorry, I interrupt you. So how then we were going to go into to research and how that's applied.
So
not applied.
Or not applied. So I think it's more not applied. And I think a lot of people probably agree with that who are, hear the term Agile thrown at them. It really just has come to mean speed. And I don't think that Agile can actually really be separated from some degree of timeliness, because that is baked into that process. But I think from that short definition alone, what we realize is that it's not just speed. There are other things that make Agile. And in research, we can adopt those things. So I know, we talked about talking about different definitions, and I think it would be great if, anybody who wants to kind of tell us in the chat or Q&A what their definitions are, that would be awesome, because I don't think there is a definition for research. And I think we have to acknowledge that there isn't, and there maybe also isn't a right answer. Some of the definitions that we've seen that, you and I have talked about is this idea of agile research being a type of market research in which requirements and solutions evolve through collaboration between the researcher and the research sponsor, iteratively open-ended, refining the research until all key questions are answered. So that kind of matches, in some sense, the original idea of agile. Another take on it would be agile as in responsive, something that we have actually done in research for a long time, especially personally as someone who works in custom. You like to think that you are agile in the way that you can be exploratory on any issue, create any kind of solution that you want to the problem. But that's not what we're really talking about with capital A agile. So another definition would be that I actually really like is going away from a plan, set, optimize, launch, and learn approach to more of an ongoing do, learn mentality. That one really resonates with me, and partly because there's a simplicity to that. It's not forcing a research agile method. It's just kind of saying we should go from do, learn, do, learn, do, learn. And then, the idea that there's always something iterative and that you're having a continuous feedback loop, which I know is something that you've kind of talked about in your idea of what agile means.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's so many different points in there. One thing I'm hearing a lot coming through just the different definitions is iterative coming through, I think, from all of those. I think maybe we come back to the responsive, because I for me, that's the least impactful, because we want to be, because what do we mean to be responsive? We want to be responsive to our stakeholders, be it if we're an agency providing to our client, or an internal research department providing to our executive team.
Yeah, responsive is a given, right?
Yeah, so I'm just looking at the chat here. It's interesting, some saying, their firm's been struggling to try and actually evolve into some of these agile methods, but never had a framework to speak about it. And I think this is where we're at. Like, we can see these different definitions. We can, and if my memory serves me right, they're from 4 or 5 years, 3-4 years ago. So
that was kind of when it first became a buzzword. Yeah.
And so we've not really talked about it that much. Somebody has put in here MVP in terms of questions answered, can work very well in qual boards. So I think it's interesting, and I think that there are these different definitions and that there isn't really a framework. And so maybe it's trying to piece out some of what is important, like what are for me, and this is my stake in the ground. I believe this iteration is just such a core part about it, that it's, and I like this last one about the do learn, the simplicity of it, the do learn mentality, which is just iterative, could be iterative in and of itself. You're trying to find something out, figure it out, move on. Next thing you're trying to figure out, move on, and just continually evolve that. As I've seen, as a body of knowledge. But
exactly.
Is that how you're thinking about it, or what do you have a preference? I mean, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so I have thought a lot about this. And I think that, part of my problem is when we have definitions, people feel constrained by them and thinking maybe that there's a particular methodology, and if they don't fit into it, that they're either not doing it right or that they just can't adopt it internally. So in my view, I kind of think of it as a mindset in terms of agile being a commitment, of course, to being, a little bit flexible, but also a commitment to simplicity, a commitment to not doing overwork and not duplicating efforts. And that's kind of where I think your idea of the knowledge bank comes in, because we should always be drawing from what already exists and iterating on top of that. And I think it's a commitment to learning as you go, which we see that do learn mentality, and adapting as you go. And also just a commitment to being okay with challenging assumptions. your own and, the research sponsor, trying to work together and collaborate to make things simpler to understand what is actually going to immediately impact business decisions and what can wait. And in what can wait, finding that you can be comfortable with having unanswered questions, which I think as researchers, we tend to not be comfortable with that at all. I know that's very true of me, and something that I've had to evolve on a lot over the years, because I do like to find out as much information as I can in as little space as I can. And I think if you're being truly agile, you're really prioritizing and then going back in. I think I take a little bit of a different take on iteration, in that I think iteration can mean a couple of different things. For me, iteration can also mean building off of what is in that knowledge library. So maybe not in the same exact question or space or hypotheses that you're given. When you're breaking it down, do you have to iterate that 10 times over until you get an answer? Or is there iteration just in the fact that you're always going back to what you already know and taking, your new pieces? So I think that iteration is twofold in that way, but it does include iteration. And I think I said this earlier, but I mean, we're never going to get away from agile not meaning some kind of timeliness or speed. It's just that we need it to not only mean that. We can't pack in like the same giant piece of research in 2 weeks because we're being asked to be agile. That's not what agile means. To get something faster, to get to a result faster, we have to break it down.
Yeah. So a lot in there, and
yeah.
So this is great. And I want to pull that apart. And I also want to get to some specifics, because I mean, how do we make this tangible? And I think we're starting to get in there. And with some of the questions, I see there's a question: what are the difference in applying agile methodology for research versus product development? I think we're going to get to that, and I think it's going to come through. But I also wanted to flag it for you, Carisha, because I think it's an interesting one.
It is.
Because and one of the things you first started to talk about was mindset, and I think it is how we're approaching. And let me even go first to speed. Now, speed as for the product development, that was the whole point of how an agile methodology emerged. It's like, how do we get to market quicker? That's the whole point. How do we get that MVP and move and get out? So speed was the end goal, whereas I think how we're using this is just simply we're being agile. We're doing it quickly.
Yeah.
And I was on an Insights Association. I was a panelist in a discussion. There was somebody from the client side, from a brand side, who was basically, talked about, they had questions from the exec team. And so they fielded a study, and with 4 hours of the survey data, coming in, he was already looking at their early initial responses and crafting up, here's what we've seen from the data at this early stage, and then sent that off to the exec team within 4 hours. And on what they found, and again, this is why I think this is important with COVID, because we need there's questions and we need answers, and people need it kind of like now, because a favorite quote of mine that I'm sure everybody's heard is, the pace of change has never been so fast, and it'll never be so slow again. And if you talk about 2020, that has just come so true, because it feels like things keep changing like that. So speed for getting research, getting insights is incredibly important, and recommendations to stakeholders. But it can't just mean, I think if we're talking about being agile, getting results in 4 hours, because that does seem to me to require the mindset that you've talked about, the iteration in terms of drawing upon a body of knowledge. How can we get those answers from maybe what we've already got, and what do we need to go and find that's new? And then how can we do something that's nimble? I mean, and I'm using my words here, but so I'm also think that the agility is a nimbleness. I'm just looking at somebody in the chat saying I have clients trying growth hacking, and I think that's an interesting idea. And would you consider that a form of agile research? I've not thought about that, but it's interesting, because it's like approaches that we can take that maybe will I feel like we need a process to it. Like I feel that whatever we mean by agile, and maybe we don't need that term, maybe there is a growth hacking element, maybe there's something we come up with ourselves because that makes sense for us as an industry, because at the end of the day we do have parameters that we're working within. We do have call me old-fashioned, but I'm a big fan of our research principles and foundations to guide how we're asking questions and what we do, because then we've got to think about data quality. So there's so many pieces in there to unpack. Where do you want to start, Krisha? I think so let's think about it. What would this look like? We've talked about mindset, we've talked about iteration, we've talked about speed. What would this actually look like if we're thinking about a research approach? Is there things that we would maybe change in how we currently typically approach research?
So again, like I go back to the word of commitment. I think we change the commitment we have to the principles of Agile. Because I think when we do get research briefs, I'm going to use, obviously myself as an example. First of all, I can envision in my mind the number of research briefs that have passed through my desk that have 10 objectives with sub-objectives that are built from 10 different stakeholders at a company for one piece of research that needs to be done as soon as possible. And none of that ends up being realistic because there are too many questions. You end up with too large a survey. You end up with too many unknowns in terms of what they already do know. Or you end up with this giant phase that people consider to be desk research, where they're going to take weeks to review everything that you have to offer them. I know because I've done this a million times. And then you just kind of end up with a lot of guesswork. And I think that as researchers, that's kind of what we do when we get these large research briefs and we try to guess what should go into the survey. We try to guess how consumers would feel. We try to guess what types of responses we should put in. And of course, in a lot of cases, I'm a custom researcher. I get a lot of exploratory issues that come my way that aren't necessarily impactful to an immediate business decision. It's, one of them is, how do women connect online is something we did a long time ago. And that's just kind of this big question. So take those things into pieces, which we do in phased research, right? A lot of us do phased research. Phase 1, we're going to look at your research. Phase 2, we're going to do some qualitative. Phase 3, we're going to do a quantitative validation. Phase 4, we're going to go back in. So phased research is kind of, in some ways our original Agile, except for it doesn't meet the definition of being fast in any way. And a lot of it is because we take a long time, we put a lot in, and we don't give an actual conclusion until the very, very end, which could be 10 weeks later. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, most of the studies that I've worked on that are exploratory, we did do phase. And I think there is some agility in that. So I'm going to use this women's study. So what do women need? That was the question, not just not to anything specific.
Very broad. Yes.
Need. And then what do they need and how do they connect to that online? Was the end question. So it was, phase 1 was talking to women, just talking, phone conversations. And that's kind of in line with how Agile software development would work. It's something super quick. I'm just going to talk to a few people, get a little bit of feedback, and then move on to the next phase. And I think that's an example of how you can do that. Move on to the next phase. Okay, I got just enough feedback to ask some bigger questions, in a survey. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to put in now what I do know, because I didn't know what I didn't know before. And then when we come out of that, we'll see what we're going to talk about next. We just know we're going to talk more because we're not going to have all the answers. And we did. We talked to women face to face after that because we were able to kind of match now from empirical data, what their needs were and how they were meeting them online. I think that process is agile. What wasn't agile about it, and this was a long time ago, was partly timing, no quick answers. And that it wasn't necessarily built to keep iterating. And that's kind of what people think the difference between Agile and phased research is. I think the open-ended iterations would be really hard on clients, because in some ways it requires like unlimited budget, which nobody has. I mean, you can't realistically say that we will iterate forever. But I think if you can have a relationship and an ability to say, we're going to iterate on unknowns, that gets us somewhere. So, I mean, I've been lucky enough to have client partnerships that were so long-standing that, you know, we could literally put in a proposal, we don't know what we don't know. And I have written that line so many times myself. And when you're working with somebody who's newer or who doesn't know you, you know, that's usually not good enough, because you're not explaining exactly what you're going to do. But it is the truth. I mean, when we can say we don't know what we don't know, and we're going to learn as we go along, here are some ideas of things we could learn or we could explore. I think that gets us to the first part of being able to be agile. So, I mean, it's first of all a relationship between researcher and research sponsor to agree that we are going to work this way. Because if you don't have that, then you're not going to be able to do it. Because I think being agile takes so much cross collaboration, not just within your own teams, but, you know, across the other side too.
I'm going to pause you there, because I think for me, as I was listening to you talk about, I mean, it's even where you started out, and I saw some comments that sounds way too familiar about putting in, like, you know, there's so many inputs from so many different stakeholders. The questions are big. There's numerous of them. There's topics, subtopics. And so the next thing you know, you know, that's why you have a very lengthy survey, because we're trying to answer so many different things. So that is in and of itself. And I'm just going to, Akrisha had said, and she'd said to me, well, when we've been talking about this before, and I just love this so much, we need to get comfortable with unanswered questions. And I feel that that's one of the quite central things, because we do think we're going in. So we've got this opportunity, we have our participants there, so let's ask them everything. Whereas where we need to shift that mindset of we can't ask everything. And if anything, we need to be very focused on what we're asking. What is the immediate question at hand? And this then comes to that this won't happen without the relationship. So where I was going to was that this seems to be a process. Maybe it's the business process, maybe is it the research process, but it does seem to be that the understanding of what we can do within the research, and trying to, what are we all agreeing to do, and are we all agreeing to do this as I am struggling for words. Is it agilely? Is it nimbly? Is it to see this through is in a timely fashion? Because the other thing that we get and is, you know, I'm sure this is going to resonate with many people on the line, in that how many times have you got to the end stage, your survey, calling survey program, but equally it could be your discussion guide, it could be for an online interview or focus group, it could be your activity guide for online qual, I mean, whatever it is, but you're almost there, and then the 10th hour, there's a whole load of requests to oh no, we want to adjust this questioning, this wording, or we want to add something in.
Yeah.
I mean, that happens, but that, and that is just, and I get it. And there's, believe me, and I just don't want anybody to think that I'm not sympathetic, or these are the challenges, these are that we work with. And you, as a researcher, no matter who your end client is, your end stakeholder, we want to please, we want to make sure that their needs are met. But there's that tension between, if we want to do something, if we want to be agile, truly agile, with the goal being speed, if we want to make sure that we're delivering, you know, impactful insights, then we've got to narrow down the scope of what we're doing. We've got to have these rules of engagement.
Right.
Maybe that's, you know, the question is do we think that we can all evolve that way? Because it can't just be the researcher side, it's got to be everybody.
Yes. I'm looking at some of the chat because I know there's
Yeah.
questions coming in there. So, I mean, there's a question of, would we break out large research projects into a set of smaller incremental research? And I think that is what we would do in an ideal world, if we could, both on the research vendor side and on the client side. If we could come to some agreements when we get those briefs on how that could be broken incrementally, and part of that has to do with how business decisions are going to be made. So a lot of times we know that by the time our research process is done, some of the decisions that would have been made based on the research have already been made. So, hey, great that you did the research, but we couldn't wait 6 weeks. So
Yeah.
I think that that decision-making criteria needs to be clearly laid out as part of the process so that you can know how to incrementalize your research. So I do think that. How does humanization come into play when doing agile research? Doing less and making more. So I'm not sure what humanization means here. Do you have a thought on
No, I would be, if you could expand on that, that would be great.
that?
But by the person that posed that there, because I mean, always think it's always intrigued by, you know, we should always think about, we're all people doing this, as whether you're the researcher, the stakeholder, the participants, and so we should have an empathy for one another. That's always where my mind goes, but I'd love for that to be expanded on.
Yes. Can I give an example of what I was researching when I was exploring what I didn't know? So I think there's a little bit of uniqueness in that I've done a lot of research that is thought leadership research, which is usually on really just randomly broad topics. Like I mentioned, what do women need and how do they connect their needs to their needs online? That's one of them. So that's where I talked about how, you know, we talked to people on the phone, which we were able to do extremely quickly. You know, within 1 week, talk to 25 people to be able to actually write a questionnaire. Now, obviously, I am a woman, so I can talk a little bit about what I need, but we never want it to just be our own team's perspective. And then kind of iterating on that through, you know, the survey and through more qual, and then, you know, even in the end, going further than that, because but our client went to conference, our client did a special event, you know, talking to more people, talking with different types of people about what that means. I've done a lot of research that's kind of like that, you know, whether it's on how we use different types of technology to connect to our needs, whether it's on, you know, how generations differ in terms of how they use social media. So those are more exploratory questions that are easy to incrementalize and easy to say, I don't know what I don't know, and then to be able to build knowledge. And I think we are going to talk about, you know, maybe what types of studies it works less for.
And I think let's go to that now, because I think, because this is a great point in where we've been talking about, because you're coming from the custom world creation, because your world is these larger scale projects that have, well, in the past been sort of lengthy, have been, you know, maybe cross country and so on. There's so many different types of research, and maybe it's easier different types of research. So my first thing I'd like us to go to is actually, are there types of research that maybe lend itself more easily to when we're thinking about an agile? So what about an ad test? What about what does this mean for some of our standard, our communications testing, our trackings, our brand trackers, our, you know, those more kind of staples, shall we say? And then, because the range of research is broad.
Yeah, so you're right. I mean, I think, you know, custom exploratory research obviously lends itself to this process, as long as we're actually trying to be agile and deliver some responses sooner to the client. The ad testing one, of course, is a great example, because, you know, ad testing for most is a very specific type of methodology. And, you know, yes, you can do it off of animatics, but a lot of people wait for finished ads. But I think what we have to recognize is that in either one of those scenarios, even if you're at animatics, you are very far into the marketing process. The ad team is very far into their process already. So again, I think it's a collaboration with the research sponsor and how to maybe get back to the questions that you need immediately going into it. So that's not something that I have done myself, but I do have a husband who works on client-side research, who does have an agile process. And that is, I have that anecdote of, the ad team coming and saying, well, what we really need to know, is if we should use this tagline or this tagline. The ads are not going to be ready for 3 weeks. And when it comes to 3 weeks, we're going to start airing them. So just go ask these questions. So I think kind of getting involved and understanding what exactly the questions are that we can ask consumers to incorporate their feedback into actual business decisions right now is really important.
Yeah.
Because especially with ad testing, I have a background in ad testing, you have a background in ad testing. So many of the ads we test are already airing. It's just kind of an exercise to put the data into a bank at this point, or to make sure we really don't need to pull an ad. And I think that an agile process says that that's not good enough, that we need to feed in to the creation. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be ready. We just need to know exactly what you need to know so that we can build something short to put into the world and get answers back to the business decision makers. And Agile is really supposed to incorporate consumer feedback at every turn. I mean, that's kind of the reason for it being a simple question that you can go out and ask, get responses on, and bring it back. And then if you need to do it again, do it again. So wait, I haven't answered your question. So I guess Agile research can be applied to almost anything.
And the tenets that I hear coming out is the collaboration. So for me, Krisha and I, this for everybody listening, I've already said, but we've talked about this a lot. And we were thinking, well, what does business process look like? How does that change? And this is something that certainly if you're on the brand side, we would love to hear how your experiences have been. It seems to be, as we're evolving this discussion and some of the comments coming in, that collaboration, so an integration on the insights function with the various stakeholders is probably the first stage of us getting, or the first marker of a potential success for an agile research approach, because you need that collaboration, you need the buy-in, that you're understanding where the research questions are coming from, the business questions are coming from, and understanding the priority there. So it's that collaboration, early entrance. So if we just take the ad testing example, it's like, it's no good when it's a finished product or even an animatic, the storyboard, it's already so far down the line. But then there's a simplicity. And I don't know if that's the right word, but maybe focus is the right word. But it's like, okay, we're not sure if we need, is that particular messaging going to work, or is that messaging going to work? And so be very focused in on, here is the business question that we need answered, and then go do that. And then that could iterate, that could, and again, maybe that's not the right word, but it is the collaboration. It's the moving through these different pieces together.
Right. I love the idea of it being focused, because I too had an issue with the word simplicity. It's the only one I could think of. Because obviously we know it's not simple, but focused. I also think part of the process is, as researchers, that we accept the focus that is given to us. So I think that if I try to think back to when this conversation started between you and I, it was because I had said that I'd been doing a lot more focused studies, smaller questions, but that had, big business impact, because they just needed to know that thing right then to move forward. And as somebody who actually, does come from a really exploratory background, that can be very, very difficult to sometimes accept that you do just need a quick answer to build upon knowledge you already have. One example I can think of is, last year's doing a study for a telecom company that was considering getting rid of their direct mail program and really just wanted to know. They had gone through the political processes internally already. They had done other research already. And it was really going to come down to, do people even know they're receiving this? And if they happen to know they're receiving it, do they know where it's coming from? And in my head as a researcher, I'm like, okay, I can think of 30 more questions I want to ask about that. And let me help you, refine what it is, because I think that there's opportunity. So let's talk about all the opportunity. And I think we have to strip ourselves back too, and kind of respect that when focused questions come our way, we need to find out what part of the process they're in, our clients are in, and why they're asking that, and not assume that they're not asking the right questions, or that we need to ask even more questions. Because I do think that we do that a lot. I know that I historically did that a lot.
And I think that's the balance, because that's what makes us, that's what makes you good at your job, by thinking about, well, what are all the implications around these questions? What are all the other questions that can be asked? Is this the right question? And I firmly believe that it's good that we shouldn't just accept what we're being told. Like, that we have to be critical about it, and in a good way, critical thinking. At the same time, yes, we love asking questions, and so we can go overboard with it. And overboard. I mean, where I wanted to also take us, I'm just aware of time here, but I do think it's worth having a data quality question here, or discussion on how can this, because it all goes hand in hand. We've talked about the research process. We've talked about, how this could impact the relationships that we have with all the different people from us as research and all of our partners, but also then all the different stakeholders and different people from the business. So there's those relationships that matter, and being focused. But then talking about being focused, we know that I attended IIEX Forward last week, and I attended a panel discussion on data quality. And this is not a new topic, and what they were talking about was things that, that we're all aware of, that is a concern of, with the sample companies. And, we talk a lot about professional respondents, participants. We talk about, are we getting our diverse enough group of people, not just demographically, but we're losing out on the psychographic, variants perhaps that's coming in through samples. There's so many different things going on. And one of the challenges that we have had is, because the web was this wonderful enabler of inexpensive way of doing research, because we weren't printing up pieces of paper and mailing things out, for example, or getting people on a telephone, so using the call center. So it was this very cost efficient way of doing research. And you could add in, if you add in 10 questions, if you add in 20 questions, heck, if you add in 30 questions, it's no real difference cost wise, apart from the participants' time. Yeah, we again, I could talk for days on respondent experience, participant experience, and how we engage people and what we need to do and to improve there. But the biggest thing is of improving is just shortening everything. And so, do you think, what do you think about, do you think there'll be the direct benefits of perhaps data quality from having shorter, and again, I'm defaulting a lot to surveys here, but it applies equally for shorter engagements on a research community and online research community for qualitative, or maybe instead of a 90-minute focus group, can it be done in 60 minutes?
Right. I think Agile research poses one of the best opportunities to data quality, because if you are focusing more, then you should have absolutely no reason to ever have an engagement that is too long or arduous for the respondent. If you are actually incrementalizing your research and iterating, then your questions should be small and immediate. I definitely, I found that with the project I was talking about, the direct mail project. of just, originally the thoughts of all the questions I was going to add to the survey to add some value, really didn't make my own cut. And then even the version I sent to the client for one of very few times had even more cuts. And so it was maybe an 8-minute survey, and I think when we're doing that, our data quality is going to be so much better. So when we take these giant questions, I mean, in my past, for sure, I have had surveys that were 35 minutes, 40 minutes. I mean, definitely, I think we're all guilty of having done that at some point. So I think, if we can actually implement some kind of Agile framework, Agile mindset, then we're going to have shorter qual and quant, and therefore better data quality. Absolutely. I mean, I think there is another side to that coin, which is that if you're really talking about iterating and iterating and iterating, let's say you're doing that in either the qual or quant setting, but I do think about quant a lot, sample balancing becomes a concern. How do you balance sample between iterations, especially when we know that a lot of sample is balanced kind of closer to the end of a study instead of throughout a study. So there's a lot more quality assurances that have to be made there. But I do think that just becomes part of, whatever process that you build internally with your teams, with your vendors, with your clients. That just has to be part of that conversation.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I do think that this also illustrates to me that, we've got a range of skills within, insights. Market research is not just a researcher, that's maybe writing the survey question. There's so many different, or writing the discussion guide. There's so many different skills, other people that have expertise in the sample and the balancing and how would we do this, or getting the statistician or modeler into how can we try, and if we want to make inferences from one piece to the next, and how can we make this data kind of speak together to make sense of it. These are the different skills that I think are growing in companies. I mean, certainly data scientists or in all different types of companies. And I think is another part of the evolution. If we are kind of shifting more to Agile, it's bringing in the different skill sets, each having their role.
I mean, that would be true to the Agile, project management framework, is that you're building teams in that way, taking everyone's unique skill sets and letting everyone do what they need to do as part of a cross-functional team. Yeah. Those are silos that would probably still have to be broken down in a lot of places.
Yeah. And I think for that, I don't think that there's necessarily, I mean, as nice as it would be to be all, I'd say, in-house or one team working together, I think how things are evolving, we're seeing lots of different partnerships between, sort of, I'm going to say more traditional agencies, of course, who are evolving themselves and what they offer, a lot of freelancers and independents, so that as well as in-house brand side, client side teams. So it's that kind of, teamwork being a more fluid team makeup, because it might be partners, external partners that come in and fill that gap as on an as needed basis. So it does feel like there are sort of changes to the business processes, the workings between different stakeholders and partners, but also coming back to this mindset and how we're approaching it.
Right. And so, I think, go ahead.
No, please.
No, I was just going to say, the more that you're able to bring those people together, even if they're from outside agencies, I think some of the most focused work I've been able to do in the last year has been with another qualitative partner, and really being able to sit down and determine how we can each answer unique questions that the client has, and how we can divide in that way instead of making things longer and more arduous for everybody involved. How do we simplify, divide and conquer, draw on the knowledge bank from the client already, and then move forward. So,
collaboration.
Yeah.
Collaboration. Okay. So I just want to round out to close it up. And if anybody's got any other thoughts or questions, please do put them in the chat. But let's go back to this thing about, so Agile, because we talked about ad testing and things that are kind of shorter by the nature. And we've got, when I started, it was a 3-4 week process, or maybe it was even a 6-week process of doing ad test.
Yeah, it was like 3 or 4 weeks.
Yeah, at a minimum. We've now kind of got that down to 2 days. But what about these larger projects? So going back to your world and being custom, and we were talking quite a bit about these large phased research. I mean, do you think it means the end of that? I mean, like a segmentation, do they just conflict? Does the ideas conflict too much with one another?
Yeah, no. Simple answer. It does not mean the end of anything, I think. And I think if you believe in the mindset of having a knowledge bank and iterating on a knowledge bank, some foundational pieces of research are part of the knowledge bank. So I think, I've done a lot of market landscape research in my time, and that I don't necessarily see as iterative in any way. I know, what we need to know about the market for that particular client. We have specific questions we need to ask to lay a groundwork of research for that client that can later be iterated on, or maybe there are, questions that arise from that. But that is, in itself an undertaking that lays a foundation. So segmentation, I think, is similar. I mean, we do phase a lot of segmentation, but we also just kind of move forward because we know how to do psychographic segmentations. And I think that kind of falls in that same space. Different types of segmentations. I've also done a lot of, unmet needs and needs segmentation, especially for auto companies. I think that we could be more iterative about things that have to do with unmet needs and needs in general, because they usually involve a lot of guesswork. Especially if we're not, we don't have time to do it all, then we're guessing a lot what those unmet needs could be. And then we want to know everything we can about that. So we ask another series of 7 or 8 questions that could easily be broken down into more iterative pieces that can be shared out with the client and then built upon. So I think it just depends. But no, I don't think it's the end of, large scale research, of longer research, or of foundational research. After all, you need to build that knowledge bank, and some of those are going to be foundational pieces.
Exactly. And to reiterate what we've netted out in this is that when you've got a different way of working in terms of a collaborative partnership with the stakeholders, then that is going to be building on and the mindset that you're taking. That's what changes these. I mean, these large scales are essential, and say they're foundational. So let's just look at this last question. Does Agile differ depending on where you sit? For suppliers, Agile is quick production and responsive question answering. For sponsors client, then Agile might be a synthesis from the research and other data sources. The division of tasks comes into play with the team of researchers assigned to bring knowledge for stitching together.
Yeah, definitely. First of all, yes, it absolutely differs depending on where you sit. I mean, ideally, it would still be more collaborative than kind of the idea that the supplier is doing this part and then the client-side researcher is sitting and stitching together. We know that is what the client-side researcher is doing. I think if there were more kind of insight into that stitching together process, then everybody could work together a little bit better. But there's no denying that it differs depending on where you sit. It also differs depending on where your company or marketing department, like what framework or philosophy they believe in. Doing agile research is one thing, but having an agile marketing department is a totally different thing. So are you doing research to fit into an agile process that your company has already developed? That begins to also be like a different point of view on what that looks like for you and what that would look like for your relationship with your research vendors.
Yeah. I think that makes sense. At the moment, we're all coming from, I mean, that there's maybe some obvious, I'm going to say camps, but the fact they're using camps doesn't, that that's already putting a connotation on a language on where that's not as fully collaborative.
Right.
And so I think that may be some of the shifts that I think it's already taking place. And so it's like this, you know, how do we, it's a partnership as opposed to a supplier, for example.
Right.
I mean, I think those are the types of, and that supplier can be internal or external, so agency or but just internal department. So look, we've come to the end of our times. Thank you, Carisha. I loved talking about this. I think it's an interesting topic and loved to hear your insights and your point of view on it. To everybody joining, thank you so much for taking the time to join today and for your participation. It's been great seeing your comments. If you've got more, please keep them coming. Please reach out to me. I'm sure Carisha would love to hear from you as well. But I think this is just a conversation and kind of wanted to open this conversation. We're at a point in time where things are changing rapidly. So let's use this thoughtfully to think about where we need to go. How can we make things better, and how can we help everybody succeed? So thank you. Would love to hear more continuous conversation. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Zoe. And Carisha, thank you so much for being our guest today. That was a wonderful discussion. As Zoe said, we've reached the end of our time together. And if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to send us an email at webinars@focusvision.com, and we will respond to you at that time. We hope you enjoyed today's series, part 3 of our series, actually. And we hope to see you at future webinars. Have a great day, everyone.